Hello, everyone. Today we have a podcast on luck in war, and this time were the Japanese just lucky. And for this, we have guest Justin.
Hello, everyone.
And what spawned this podcast basically was a quote on when I posted the Savo Island video where somebody said, "Yeah, the Japanese had an extreme risky plan, and they were basically just lucky. It wasn't French or US incompetence that Japanese and Germans were very successful in the early war. And while I disagree here, and I think Justin also disagrees here. And for this, we will specifically look at naval night combat, and we look a bit also at the Battle of Savo Island. So, Justin, how would you start off?
Yeah, so this is kind of, I guess, a direct continuation from the previous one about France 1940 and just luck generally. And just to use a Japanese example because it's come up. So, and specifically Savo Island, because it's a convincing Japanese tactical victory that honestly could have turned into a strategic victory if Mikawa had made different decisions, but we won't bother getting into that. To chalk it up all to luck is very inaccurate, particularly when it comes to naval night combat. This isn't something that you just kind of slap together and then hope it works during the war. I mean, basically, to dismiss Savo Island as luck is to dismiss at minimum 20 years of Japanese preparations for exactly this kind of action. And I mean, the ships they used were designed with this kind of action in mind. The commander and the formations were trained for this kind of for years and years, and in extremely realistic night drills. There was a lot of ships that were damaged and people died in interwar exercises because the Japanese were conducting them in very realistic circumstances in the interwar period. And also, Savo Island doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's probably the most famous night engagement of maybe either the most famous or the second most famous after Surigao Strait, but it's one of the most famous. And most of the other ones, people might know a little bit about them, but they don't care. I mean, there's like Balikpapan. There is like the night phases of kind of the closing parts of kind of the Battle of the Java Sea, all that kind of stuff. The Japanese consistently throughout these, and almost all of them, they perform quite well. Surigao Strait, there are issues, but also that was less of a battle and more of a systematic execution of like a horribly outclassed formation that knew it was doomed. But the like Savo Island in particular, I mean, this is just textbook Japanese night action. And it works out very well. And the reason why it is as decisive as it is that the Allies make a series of mistakes. They're overly reliant on their radar. Their commander, the commander of the force, is not even present. The cruisers are divided. There's all sorts of stuff. And again, like I mean, Drac did a huge video. You can go watch that if you're unsure of details. But it's an extremely important kind of like it underlines the Japanese preparations. This is not luck, and there's always an element of certain chance and things like that. Although in this one, it's not even that much chance. It's just like going back to I guess your kind of original definition of luck. When preparation meets opportunity, that's the Battle
Yeah.
of Savo Island. I mean, so you have all these imminent or all of this important Japanese preparation that spans back years. And then the opportunity is that there's a whole laundry list of things that the Allies are doing incorrectly in this particular instance. And when you have a force this well prepared that stumbles into a force that is set up the way it is, pretty much set up for failure in hindsight, um, they get torn apart. And it's I mean, it's like if you imagine this battle, it's set up basically the exact same way, but then you substitute out the Japanese for some navy that is not well trained in night combat. Suddenly, I mean, either the battle never happens because we're not trained for night combat, we are not going to fight a night battle, which is a distinct possibility. So, in other words, even though that the Americans and or the Allies are not prepared for this night action, they are the enemy just never comes because they
Yeah.
aren't trained in night combat. They never show up.
And
Or
the others don't know that the enemy is not prepared usually as well.
exactly, yeah, like Mikoa had no idea. He just sailed down there because this is what they do, and they're going to fight a night action, and we're going to see how it goes. And when it comes to, if a lesser trained force had stumbled across this allied force with all the same problems, they probably wouldn't have done anywhere near as well, because conducting a night battle is not something you just do. Okay, so to drive this point home that there was a lot more going on at the Battle of Savo Island than just luck, let's consider just this weird hypothetical. So the situation is a cruiser and destroyer task force falls upon an opposing force that's in a similar state to the Allies off Savo that night. So in the first scenario, the attacking force has the technology, the doctrine, the leadership, and the training in place to execute an aggressive surface action at night. The scenario B is the attacking force has neglected surface night actions and therefore did not rigorously train or equip for such naval actions. They perhaps maybe had some doctrine in place, maybe a little bit of training, but it just wasn't a priority spanning back years. So in scenario A, you get something similar to Savo Island. The Allied forces soundly defeated, almost making it appear easy or lucky. In scenario B, the attacking force isn't used to sailing information at high speed during the night, so two cruisers collide and fall out of line. They will take no further part in this action. The remaining ships in the formation, such as it is, roll down toward the Allied disposition. Their lookouts have not trained that rigorously in spotting targets at night. Less attention has been paid to the development and installation of night optics, and they fail to initially spot the Allied cruisers. Or maybe if somebody did maybe see something, they just didn't believe it, or maybe they thought it was a friendly ship, and they just don't report it. There is no coherent doctrine of long-range concealed firing with cruiser torpedoes that would time their torpedo salvos with those of their guns like the Japanese Navy had, because they haven't really paid that much attention to night combat up to this point in this pre-war thinking. So the confusion amongst this attacking force wastes enough time that the Allies spot the approaching force first and open fire. This throws the already confused attacking formation into complete chaos. They attempt to fire back, but they're down by two cruisers, they're out of formation, they're completely disoriented, and their commander has barely any experience in training at night. And in all of this chaos, everything's falling apart. He orders a withdrawal after sustaining some damage, and the force retreats back up the slot in disarray. And scenario B ends in a pretty convincing Allied victory despite all of the Allied problems with their disposition. So this is the central point we're getting at, is if you just stop at, oh, well, I guess the Japanese were lucky. When you think of a scenario in these kinds of terms, it's like, well, a lot of stuff had to work beyond luck for the Japanese to be able to exploit the opportunity of the various issues with the Allied disposition and the circumstances that the Allies had placed themselves in. The Region Marina is known for being less prepared for night actions, and if you see like the Region Marina just falling apart under night actions against the much better prepared Royal Navy, like we have examples of this. I'm not going to say the U.S. was unprepared, because, and again, there's going to be a long form discussion with Trent Hone that comes out that I think adds a lot of nuance to this
Yeah.
around U.S. preparations. In short, the U.S. wasn't as unprepared for night combat as kind of the conventional wisdom would say, and indeed, in some instances, the U.S. performs quite well in night actions, which is another whole thing. So why was the U.S. performing poorly in, say, the Battle of Savo Island, but then at the Battle of Balikpapan, which actually happens before Savo Island in the Dutch East Indies? Why did the Americans perform so well in that action? And there's reasons for that beyond just luck. Um, so in this case, yeah, I think it's a pretty clear cut case of this is luck is. I don't think it played in any major role in Savo Island beyond however coincidence or whatever happens. I mean, yeah, it was coincidental that Mikawa sailed down and the Allies were unprepared, but also there were reasons for the Allies being unprepared.
What are typical problems you run into in night combat in naval actions, or what are typical failures that
Uh,
happen?
Communications between ships, just confusion generally. And you can see this happening to both sides in different actions. So, for example, at Savo Island, it's the Allies who are consistently surprised and confused, because with these night actions, and Trenholm gets into this, and actually the part that's been released already, and if people haven't seen that, they should check it out, where these night actions are 50 billion times more confusing in reality than they are when you're reading it in a book from a historian who
Yeah.
sat down with all the records and has stitched it all together to a narrative that's kind of makes sense. Um, these things are really confusing. For example, the Japanese admiral in the next battle, the Battle of Cape Esperance, he's mortally wounded by fire from the American fleet. He's just shouting out idiots because he thinks that it's friendly fire. And he pretty much goes, throughout the entire action, he's thinking this is a horrible friendly fire accident. And this is a battle where the US are shooting at them, and it's not friendly fire. But these actions are so confusing. And it's why training is so important, and unit cohesion, and also the surprise, because even if you're well trained and you have good unit cohesion, as the Battle of Cape Esperance demonstrates, the Japanese come in, they're still very capable. They're the Japanese, they're good at night combat, but they are surprised. And since they are surprised, they're immediately thrown into confusion. And since they're confused, they're basically thrown back by the Americans, because that's the way these night actions go. You cannot wing this stuff. Um, and there's just the list of complications. I mean, you can barely see. This isn't Hollywood nighttime either. I like that scene in the Pacific where they're watching kind of a representation of the Battle of Savo Island, except that it still has that Hollywood nighttime lighting where you can still see everything. Whereas the reality is, I mean, it is literally pretty much pitch black outside of what you can illuminate with star shells or searchlights. And in that environment, it is just chaos. I mean, if you've even seen the handful of photos that exist from these night actions, they're terrible quality because, of course, they are. And you look, and it's just dark, and then you see one beam of light that's maybe highlighting something, and then fires might be illuminating something else. It's extremely, extremely confusing under these circumstances, and it's why that is a foundational thing that you have to understand if you're going to understand any of these night actions.
There's something I need to add here. Light pollution. This is actually a real word. Our our cities and everything emit so much light nowadays during the night that they are bright as day. So a lot of people who have, I assume, never been out like in an area that is very far away from civilization, you will actually see how dark night is, because nowadays it's pretty hard to see anywhere. And there in the Pacific, were not much infrastructure, and even in Second World War, I mean, even continental Europe, there was night light discipline all the time. So a night going out in the city nowadays, even if the lights are already off, is still very bright to compare to anything you usually know. That should be added here, yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like it is a very confusing. You have very few senses to operate from. Although going back into preparations, I mean, the Japanese, it's among the best conventional night optics in the world at this point, with very, very good nighttime binoculars and other optics on their ships, which is why even when the Americans had the advantage of radar, a lot of these earlier night battles, the Japanese lookouts were still the first ones to spot, or they spotted at about the same time that American radars did. So, in other words, there was also not a huge technological gap necessarily in these very early battles. I think the value of radar, it becomes extremely important later, but for reasons that are not necessarily related directly to that technology, but to the system around the technology, which
Yeah.
Trenholm gets a bit more into, is because these things are so confusing. The formation of the CIC, the Combat Information Center, that could distill all of this information and then relay it to the commanders very quickly, is decisive. I mean, that's arguably one of the most decisive things, and why that some of these later night engagements start to favor the Americans so much, is the Americans have now created a technological and an organizational system that can take all of this data, distill it, and then turn it into action way faster than what the Japanese can do with a traditional commander standing on the bridge making decisions. Um, so yeah, and again, so it's not really luck on the Japanese side. And then later on, when the Americans start doing better in these night engagements, it's not luck on their part either. It's they've created new systems that they can use to manipulate the chaos and confusion of a night battle to their advantage.
Yeah, I mean, that's with technology. If you don't have a proper doctrine and how to use it and utilize it, it doesn't help you that much. If you have a computer nowadays and you use it like a typewriter, you can have the best computer and everything, but it's just useless. If you use your computer like you should with the internet connection and everything else, you can create something completely different to a person 20 years ago who is just a typewriter, basically, because you have so much more access to information immediately. But that requires that you are able to distill the information, to have the right tools, and the right approaches to stuff. This is all. This is not luck. You were born in the right time. Yeah, well, if 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 you don't manage the tools properly, it's not gonna happen. So, is there anything else we have to add here?
No, I think we're good on this one. Maybe the one thing I'll add is that thank God the U.S. Navy didn't chalk it up to luck. If you look at the U.S. Navy as a learning organization, as Trent Hone does during the war, I mean, they're not looking at the Battle of Savo Island and saying, "Oh, it's just luck. We don't need to change anything." And the reason why the U.S. Navy becomes as effective as it is because they can immediately recognize, "Oh man, we screwed up. Let's fix it." And they would do just that, and they would do it repeatedly. Like through all these, that's one of the best chapters actually in Trent Hone's book, where he goes through and it's battle by battle. The Americans are going, okay, we did this wrong. We're going to change it. Okay, we did this wrong. We're going to change it. And they go through and they keep doing this. And that's why the US Navy becomes as effective as it does. It's not because they just have innate belief in American superiority and they salute the flag twice a day and they eat apple pie. It's because they are willing to accept that they are making mistakes and they are going to improve. And they do. And that's one of the remarkable facets of the United States Navy and a lot of these other organizations that are learning from their mistakes. They aren't just resting on their laurels and chalking it all up to luck, like somebody on an internet forum will 80 years later or whatever.
Yeah. Let's end with the Facebook post here, because the one guy wrote, it wasn't US or French incompetence as much as the Japanese and Germans getting really lucky, on which somebody responded, kind of a running theme with the Axis powers. And I think this is just inherently wrong. And I mean, I see a general trend in my comment section. I might be wrong here in my perception, that for a long time there were these wereaboos who was the Germans were so good and everything in Second World War, and now I see the other trend coming around where like people are completely dismissing everything and they were just lucky and everything else. It's just, this is the same thing like previously. It's monocausalic, oversimplistic, looking at stuff. No, that's not how that works. This is a complete, or as one military historian once noted specifically about, I think about Stalingrad, he says, some people have no understanding how the system of the Wehrmacht worked. It's not coming down to Paulus and Manstein making a few decisions. We're talking about several 100,000 men and a complete infrastructure of command here. Yeah. So I go with luck is preparation meets opportunity. You have it on the individual level, and you have it even more the more people you get into it when you have an organization or a unit.
Mm-hmm.
So, big thank you here, Justin.
Yeah, always nice to be here.
And thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye.